In Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the Salamander is described as a serpentine elemental with a humanoid torso covered in spines and wreathed in flame. Though they're classified as elementals, they were often referred to as serpent folk by their fellows and other scaled ones. They start their lives as fire snakes, their larval form, and grow up into salamanders over time, where they became known as metalsmiths and expert warriors trained in the art of the spear. The salamander has an AC of 15 and 90 hit points, with a standard speed of 30 feet. They have decent stats across the board with no negative modifiers, and they're vulnerable to cold damage but resistant to non-magical weapons and completely immune to fire. They have the trait Heated Body, in which any player that hits them with a melee attack within 5 feet is dealt 2d6 fire damage, a potential of 2 to 12. They also have the trait Heated Weapons, in which any metal weapon that they use deals an additional 1d6 fire damage, which is already factored into their standard stat block. In combat, they make 2 attacks per turn, 1 spear and 1 tail. The spear has a range of 5 feet in melee and a thrown range of 20 accurate, 60 inaccurate, dealing 2d6 plus 4 damage, a potential of 6 to 16 if used one-handed, or 2d8 plus 5, a potential of 7 to 21, if used with both hands. Regardless, they also get 1d6 fire damage on the strike. Their tail has a reach of 10 feet, dealing 2d6 plus 4 bludgeoning damage, plus 2d6 fire damage, a total potential of 8 to 28. The target is then grappled and restrained, and while held like this, the salamander can just deal free damage to this target without making another attack roll. As a DM, the first thing I would do to the salamander is decide whether or not to give it a shield. With a shield, their AC rises to 17, but the damage potential of their spear is lowered, as they can only strike one-handed. Regardless of the choice, the strategy is relatively straightforward. I would have the salamander closing distances as much as it can on every turn, trying to get into melee range with casters and ranged players, as melee players will need to keep up and will be taking damage with every strike they make. I would have the salamander target one player with a spear attack and another with their tail, preferably those that appear physically weaker and less likely to break free of the grapple. From there, I would have a player grappled as often as I can to deal free damage each turn, and strike at others with the spear as I see fit. In Mythology, the fire salamander was a creature created partially by our old friend and Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder. While other naturalists were concerned with the salamander's real-life ability to exist in water and on land, as they're amphibious, Pliny and some others were concerned with other properties that were widely contested. Pliny and his group asserted that salamanders could possibly extinguish flames with oils secreted from their bodies, as well as actively live in fire. It's possible that this trait was recorded due to the common sight of the golden alpine salamander who live in logs, fleeing from the flames when their home was unceremoniously tossed into a campfire. Pliny's critics claimed that the immunity to fire was far-fetched, but clearly the idea stuck, as salamanders were sometimes depicted wreathed in flames, and a fire salamander was a common symbol for blacksmiths and metalworkers in the Middle Ages. As time went on, these legends morphed into fantastical creatures that live in fire called salamanders, though their depictions range from reptilian to dog-like with wings and fancy hats. Humans are pretty strange. In the Renaissance, these images and legends shifted once again, becoming more occult in nature and linking the salamander to fire, magic, and in some cases the flames of hell. In addition to this, misinterpretations of Egyptian hieroglyphics led to some European scholars believing that salamander was a sigil used to represent men being burned alive. And in French lore, the great lizards of Auvergne were described to be very salamander-like, with a burning breath of poison that would cause the skin of their victims to bubble, boil, and burn away. A magic power likely based on the actual side effects of ingesting incredibly toxic salamanders, leading typically to death. In comparing the monster to the myths of the fire salamander, we find that they're actually fairly different in description. The salamander legends in real life were based on an actual animal, although the fire traits seem to be based on mistakes and misinterpretations of their nature and depictions in ancient texts. While the salamander legend ties the salamander to fire, the salamander in D&D is an elemental resembling a snake, and actually made out of fire. Both are associated with fire and linked to metallurgy and blacksmithing, a fitting profession for creatures of living flame. If you enjoyed that video, please leave a like and comment below, and consider subscribing to the channel. You can also join the Patreon for $1 a month, link in the description below, to access videos days before they're posted here, as well as other exclusive stuff like short stories, videos, and more. For all of my other content, you can find me on Twitch at Moglaroo, YouTube and TikTok at Moglaroo Streams, or my website, mwjgilmore.com.